Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Premier Injuries. I've fluffed up the opening already. The Premier Injuries deadline injury news. So, first of all, I wanted to start off the stream today, obviously talking about the sad news of Pelé passing. You know, we as a football community are so sad losing one of the legends of football. I mean, he was before my time. I think he was way before your time as well, Ben. But what are your kind of thoughts when you think about Pelé? I mean, just professionalism, bringing such beauty to the sport, didn't he?
Yeah, I just think it's, I'm a little bit young to appreciate what he done on the field. Most of the visions that my mind throws up are of the black and white era. I was more Diego Maradona, if the truth be told. Pelé was always there, but in recent years, I certainly remember the guy who was, such a gent away from the pitch. So I remember him more fondly, not necessarily for what he'd done, during his football days, but as an ambassador, as a person, as a great person at that. He was genuinely and how he lived his life. He was iconic. And just looking at some of the tributes that have been pouring in from every corner of the earth, from every single person. It's astonishing, and he sort of transcends the footballing world. Beating, he was the first guy to really sort of put himself out there as an iconic sports person. Before there were anybody else. It was a generational thing. It was just and it's such a sad day, but a one, that I think we can look back with a smile on our face and just appreciate, really. Like I say, for me, it's been a little bit of an education and just learning and appreciating how good he actually was. And I've seen a couple of videos. The one that sticks in my mind at the moment is, if you see a skill today, just remember Pelé done it first. And there are a number of sort of extracts where you see the Cruyff turn, you see Zidane, you see Ronaldo, the chop, and every single one you go back and there's footage of Pelé, being there, done it, had the t-shirt. What a humble, fantastic human being, and God rest his soul.
Yeah, and in terms of it, obviously the work that we do here focusing on injuries, what I think was amazing about Pelé as well was he was a pioneer of that football lifestyle. He didn't kind of engage in too much kind of drinking or other things, and he trained every day. Even after he retired, he was running on the beaches. There's lovely videos of him at a ripe old age kind of going out there. So yeah, it's sad to lose somebody who changed a lot of football. Giandro Bottas, I think he just kind of summarised it quite nicely. Pelé, what a legend, changed the game of football. So let's get into then the Premier League injuries. What we're focusing on is game week 18. And we've got loads of comments already here, Ben. Loads of people. Andy said first one here. John Dre said he's looking forward to it. Sam says third one here. And Chixa says good afternoon, Ben and Jason. Yeah, and just a bit of injury news on you, Ben. You've not been too well. You've been a bit under the weather. So if there's any coughing or sputtering from Ben, pre-apologies. He's been under the weather. But you put the effort in to come on today, didn't you?
Yeah, look, I've got the dreaded lurgy. I'm not the only one, and we'll discuss that as we go through, the 20-team breakdown. There's plenty of teams and players and even backroom staff being affected. So, yeah, look, you dust yourself down, and like I say, if I do throw the odd cough in here and there, I apologise. I'll try and do my best to manage that, mute that, and I may be sitting a little bit of water along the way.
I mean, we will get on to Callum Wilson later, but is there any relation between your illness and his? Because we've seen that you two have got a growing friendship.
No comment. No. What I would say is, no, I haven't been involved in any of the stuff at Newcastle since before the Christmas break.
Oh.
So I hold my hands up, and it's nothing to do with me, and vice versa.
So let's continue with this analysis then. And just before we get into the injury news. Just to remind people, we're going to go through all the teams alphabetically, and as you can see here on the Premier Injuries website as well, head over there if we don't answer one of your questions, or if there's anything kind of just after we've gone live as well, because we're as live as possible, but there's breaking news because there is the press conferences all afternoon. But we're going to start off then with Bournemouth. We've got the predicted lineup, and as always as well, Ben, we offer the warning that you've done these a little bit earlier in the week, and with the ever-changing news and also the fact that the games are so close together, it's hard to stay up with these lineups, so you are going to give them the most up-to-date as possible. So yeah, what is Bournemouth's situation?
Yeah, I mean, before we kick off this full sort of analysis of all the teams, what I would like to say, this is a fairly unique game week in the fact that we haven't had as many live press conferences as we would have typically had. What we've had a lot of embargoed post-match press conference quotes from managers following game week 17, Boxing Day 26th, 27th and 28th. Therefore, a lot of the players that were on the injury list in and around those times, there will be no real-time updates on those. And also, any of those players involved in those matches, they won't be evaluated for, 24 to 48 hours. So there may be still one or two slight issues that are identified, post-match comments, as it were. So very difficult. We're going to try and do my best to weed us way through and give us a little bit of understanding of where these players should be at. But like I say, we touched upon it at the start of the show. There's a lot of illness. There's a few bugs going around a lot of the camps. So in terms of personnel, that could scupper a lot of teams. So as always, try and build your bench strong. Have 3 starters if possible. You want to try and mitigate the risk of playing, without, 11 starters. So, do your best to keep that nice and strong, because there are going to be a lot of shocks, surprises, and a few disappointed FPL managers this weekend. I'm pretty sure of that.
And I think as well, with a lot of the kind of players that we've seen do well this season, there has been some cheaper players, the likes of Andres Pereira, who can build out your bench, give you that strength in there without costing too much. It's been one of those seasons where we have seen the ascension of quite cheap assets. But yeah, let's focus then on Bournemouth, who have some cheap assets. I don't know if many people want to invest in them too heavily, but what is the injury news there?
Yeah, we had the return of the skipper, Lloyd Kelly, in game week 17. That was a bit of a surprise. Was no involvement in the Carabao Cup. He spent a few months on the sidelines with an ankle ligament problem, came straight back in and done a decent job. Now, whether he can recover fully with that quick turnaround in games remains to be seen, but we do have him in this lineup as it currently stands. Maybe, moving on into game week 19, maybe more of an issue, but that's something that we'll address a little bit down the line. In terms of, again, how we're looking to set this team up, I see it more of a 3-5-2 and attacking with Smith and Zamora really pushing on in there. The absence that people may be a little surprised at is Christie. I've looked at various ways of how we could possibly set it up. It would probably mean removing Chris Mepham from the team and maybe shoehorning Christie in there and maybe going to a more solid 4-4-2. But I just think for this game in particular, maybe the 3-5-2 is the better option. I'm not expecting anybody else to return from a treatment room, although Gary O'Neill was absent from Friday's press conference due to illness. So Tommy Elphick took that. So with regards to, again, we've already had a sickness bug sweeping through that Cherries camp. So any decisions with regards to personnel for the weekend are all going to be late calls.
Goodness me. So let's move from Bournemouth on to Arsenal. And I don't think there's any change in the team from that game week 17 side, is there?
Yeah, we've pretty much left it as it is. In terms of needing to manage the players and manage load, it's not an issue. Plenty of recovery time. And we've also heard from Mikel Arteta in the past. Players need to, I think the question marks raised with regards to Bukayo Saka and the number of minutes that he was playing last season. And he said, look, these players need to learn how to tolerate, playing 2 and 3 games a week at high intensity and performing at optimal levels. Lionel Messi does it. Cristiano Ronaldo does it. So, for that reason, he wants his players to be robust and strong enough to be able to cope and physically play, those games in quick succession. That's why I don't see any great deal of change in there. Of course, we're yet to hear from Mikel Arteta. That's the last press conference. We will get it ahead of deadline. The only, we did see Zinchenko return to the bench against West Ham. He is a possibility for that left back berth, but we'll see. It is a little bit of a coin toss. I think he is probably the preferred option, but Kieran Tierney just has that edge in terms of that little bit of match fitness.
Yeah, and I think one of the points as well, a lot of people worried about with the World Cup players overplaying. I look at the Arsenal squad and not a lot of them went deep in the tournament. But another point is probably teams like Arsenal are well fixed anyway. I think a lot of the teams in the Premier League are well fixed because actually players have played less games than they would have to this point, Ben. So actually, do you think there might be a decrease in injury incidents through January? We're going through the really tough period that we usually see a rise, lots of soft tissue injuries. Is this actually going to be maybe a good thing for some of these players?
Absolutely. I think in terms of where we ordinarily would be heading into this festive programme, players would be overloaded. There would be a lot of fatigue. So the risk of incidents inherently would be a great deal higher. And I'm almost of the thinking that we'll probably won't see maybe those spikes in terms of setbacks, maybe until possibly back end of March or maybe going into April. And in fact, given the fact that those players have been away at the World Cup and involved in, and they've maintained that level of competitive play, it could be those players who remain with their clubs who will find that difficulty transitioning from, just those non-competitive and training matches being thrown straight in to this competitive high intensity environment. And it may be those players who indeed are picking up the injuries and not those ones who have sort of maintained those competitive levels throughout because of their involvement out in Qatar.
One other question that comes around this time of year is rotation. A lot of people worry about it, and we have seen in previous seasons, Christmas, January, because of the high volume of games, there's a lot of rotation. But again, because of these, discussion points that we've already covered, do you think that actually teams will be more settled as well for those reasons, but also for the fact that teams will want to reintegrate, want their best 11s out there for that, or almost like in the post pre-season start of the season when you want your best 11 out there to get that match sharpness? Is that going to be another thinking of these managers?
It's going to be a careful consideration on how you manage your squad over this period. I think 17 to 18, that isn't a big concern. There's plenty of time and recovery for the players in between those. 18 to 19, now that's going to be the worry. That's when I would expect the glut or the most change in terms of personnel. Squads go deep these days, so that will vary from manager to manager on how they want to load those, and they will always, they'll always outwardly say that they're focusing on, the next game and that's it. But behind closed doors, they will be picking their teams accordingly with one eye on those upcoming matches as well. So it's difficult, but like I say, for 18, I'm expecting, given the recovery time and between the games, for sides to hopefully remain pretty settled. It's 19 where I see there being a few issues.
Sam Smith has already said his beliefs that generally it does look like the players who played at the World Cup are at a higher level than those who didn't. We've also got a message from GV. There could be some matches where it be snowing. That'll be interesting to see how players adapt to that as well. But we're going to move on to Aston Villa. We'll probably deep dive into some other topics as we go along. But Villa, it's been interesting. I was expecting them to put up a better show against Liverpool. Unai Emery likes to play he has the smaller team mentality where he doesn't like to lose, so he'll defend deep. And I was surprised with the 3-1. It was quite disappointing at times, but on the flip side, they were impressive. They just couldn't get their shots away against Liverpool. On another day, they could have probably drawn that game or at least got another goal in that match. So is there going to be any changes? And is it hard to predict with Unai Emery as well because he's so pragmatic?
I mean, it is a little bit difficult, and it's hard to maybe put your own thoughts and feelings to one side when looking at predicted lineups. I cannot get away for the life of me with Leon Bailey. Every time I watch that player, he flatters to deceive, and he massively disappoints. You know, you talk about maybe Aston Villa. The expectation was that they could have maybe performed a little bit better against Liverpool, but there were a couple of chances in there, one for Ollie Watkins and certainly one for Leon Bailey, where, you know, they're not even difficult. Put those away, and that changes the whole face of the game. And you know, Aston Villa are walking away with at least a share of the spoils. You know, so potentially you have Danny Ings in there who could come in for Leon Bailey. You know, he looks busy and he looks good on the eye, but I think I watched him earlier in the season against Southampton as well on a Friday night, if I recall. Wow. Wow. I'm sure I could have pulled on an Aston Villa strip that night and done a better job. But that's another story. Back to the predicted leg. Matty Cash. I was a little bit surprised that Ashley Young got the nod. Maybe that was, you know, due to his involvement again at the World Cup and having that additional time off. But I feel as if Matty Cash should be in a much better place as well to start. There are one or two other sort of tinkering that you could potentially look at. Dendonk as somebody else that could come into that midfield, but it looks as if now that the fully fit Kamara is sort of laying down a marker for that starting berth, we know that Ramsey is currently out with a hamstring problem. Coutinho, I don't really see him pushing for a starting berth. A lot of suggestion and rumours going around that he wants out of Villa, despite, you know, signing that contract in the not too distant past. So, you know, he's an expensive paperweight to have. So it remains to be seen, you know, whether he does remain at Villa Park or, you know, if he goes in either the January window or the summer.
Yeah, well, GV's question was about Coutinho. So do you think he's nowhere near the squad at the moment? Sorry, the first 11.
I mean, well, he's obviously coming off the back of that injury, first and foremost. So in terms of that sharpness, that won't be there. So he hasn't got that fitness. He'll not be at that level quite yet. And ultimately, you know, we questioned this under Steven Gerrard. I think he persevered and with Coutinho for far too long. He certainly wasn't pulling up any trees. I don't think he deserved his place in that starting 11. And I think maybe, you know, his performances and his persistence to keep him in the team maybe contributed to his downfall there a little bit. So, you know, I don't see Unai Emery as accommodating as Gerrard. And, you know, I don't think Villa were too bad. And, you know, the result, yes, against Liverpool, but there were some promising signs in there. And I just think it needs a bit of a change in attitude for Coutinho. Villa need to see the player that arrived initially on loan hit the ground running, not the player that sort of disappeared once he signed his contract. And, you know, like I say, there's very rarely smoke without fire, and those murmurings of Coutinho not being very happy at the club. I certainly think there's something in that.
Yeah, well, he seems to have contractitis that hits a lot of players when they've just signed a new contract. Just to remind people as well, lots of lovely questions here, but we're going to go through them as we talk about those teams. So we've got a question about Almiron, Martial, Andreas Pereira, and I think one on Aspilicueta as well. So when we get to those teams, we will cover those questions. And if I forget, do put it in the comments as well. It's all down to me. Ben doesn't have control of the comments, so you know you can have a go at me, not Big Ben here. But we're going to move on to Brentford, and again, it will be interesting with the news what happens with Ivan Toney over the coming weeks. But before that happens, you know he looks formidable. He looks great as usual, and the team, they did a good job against Tottenham. You know, tactically they were so good. They kind of figured out how to counter Tottenham. Maybe there's questions which I've had for a while about Spurs, but Brentford, is there any injury news that's going to hold them back?
Not necessarily hold them back. I mean, they do have players returning. Christoph Ayer is back on the training pitches, and also Aaron Hickey. They're both very close. Probably, I would think maybe the FA Cup is more realistic in terms of a potential return from them. Frank Onyeka is a minor hamstring issue. Unfortunately, he's just missed out. Um, yeah, so there's not a great deal of change within that Brentford lineup. You're right about Ivan Toney. He's on borrowed time. There will be some kind of suspension. It remains to be seen how long that will be. Probably feels he has a lot to prove, following Gareth Southgate's snub for the World Cup. In his own mind, I'm sure he firmly believes that he deserved that place ahead of Callum Wilson. And he'll also want to go out on with a bit of a bang. Like I say, I'm expecting, if we've seen this before, I think it was with Joey Barton, he's in line for a fairly substantial layoff. So, yeah, he'll want to make the most of his game time in the Premier League before, his enforced absence.
I think one of the interesting things about Brentford this season as well is their closeness to the line of kind of negative goal difference per 90. You look at the fact that they're conceding about 1.8 xG conceded per 90. They're scoring 1.72, and so they're very close to the line in terms of that. And it'll be interesting to see if Toney is found guilty, if he is banned, where does the team go from there? Because they're very much living on the line of, right, we're going to outscore teams, but without him up there could be a massive collapse in them. So Samir has said, do we keep Toney until we know what's happening? Raya, the only asset. As a Bees fan, so disappointed we haven't got more assets, to be honest. I think, would you play that tactic, Ben? Because Toney does look that good. Keep him until there is certainty over his future. The other thing that I'd say is I wouldn't have Raya in. I think there's better 4.5 goalkeepers like Sanchez because... Brentford are conceding over a goal a game on average per 90.
Yeah, look, Thomas Frank is keeping faith in his striker. Toney looks like he's got the bit between his teeth. He's returning, he's getting goals. You've got to make hay while the sun shines. Stick with him until, that FA hearing comes to pass, and we'll see what kind of suspension he needs to serve. But until that day, if you've got him, I would keep him. Is he somebody that I'd be looking to bring in? No.
Yeah, probably to avoid that unnecessary transfer as well. That's the kind of thing we're looking at the moment. Let's turn our attention to Brighton, though, and any big changes in their 11.
There was hope that Danny Welbeck could recover from a muscle problem that he picked up in Dubai, to maybe have the opportunity to face his former employers. That doesn't look to be the case. He's probably a week away or so, along with Adam Webster. So maybe the FA Cup for those. The Seagulls will be forced into one change again. A great result there on Boxing Day, but unfortunately, Moses Caicedo picked up his 5th caution of the campaign, so that'll keep him out of the next one. And we've brought in Billy Gilmore. Hasn't had much of a look in, since his arrival on loan. Maybe, just maybe, this is his time to shine. Fingers crossed for him. There is a little bit of flexibility and leeway in that lineup, but under Roberto De Zerba, it's a lot more settled than the days when we had Graham Potter at the helm.
I mean, I'm not going to lie, I forgot that Billy Gilmore had gone there on loan because, the team was so settled. Caicedo was playing so well. But let's move our attention to Chelsea. We did have a question on Azpilicueta. We'll get to that first. We'll get to that after you've given us the introductory injury news.
Yeah, and this was one of those ones. This was post-match comments that have just been embargoed and released this afternoon from Graham Potter. So again, if there's been any niggles post-match or any illness, they won't be covered. First and foremost, we have Kipper between the sticks. That came as a little bit of a surprise. Cast me mind, that was a Tuesday night. Had very little training following an ongoing foot condition, plantar fasciitis, painful condition. But that was because Edouard Mendy picked up an injury at the World Cup. Non-specific, it just said it was bone related. So whether he's going to be available or not remains to be seen. But Kepa looks to have that position nailed down. Now, we've seen that Reece James is also out probably around about a month. Looks to be a recurrence of, or certainly an injury in and around that same area of the right knee, that lateral collateral ligament, LCL. So that's going to be a little bit of an issue. How Graham Potter wants to set his team up, again, there's a few ways we can go with this, either with a 4-4-2 or as I've went with here, which more of a 3-4-3 or even a 3-5-2, depending on how you want to sort of mix those players up. And I have Azpilicueta on that right-hand side, more of a wing-back role. But like I say, he is more than capable of dropping a little bit deeper if, Graham Potter wants to put Cucurella in at left-back and maybe drop Chabaloa from this lineup.
Well, this is the question Jandre Bottas once answered. He said, how nailed is Azpilicueta being the only fit right back at Chelsea? I mean, is anybody else going to fill in at that role?
We have seen, and the reason I've went for Azpilicueta on this 3-5-2, we have seen on previous occasions this season, Ruben Loftus-Cheek drop in on that right-hand side of midfield. But obviously we know that he's currently sidelined. So at the moment, hands are pretty much tied. I mean, like I say, you could, I suppose, in theory, Kovacic is back on the training pitches. Now, does he get thrown straight back in there? It's a tough call. You could argue that maybe, like I say, you could go with Kovacic there and then maybe push Gallagher out to the right-hand side. He has also played that role there before. So, you would never categorically state or guarantee that Azpilicueta is 100%. We're playing percentages here. And it's a tough call, but I just think in this instance, maybe with Kovacic just returning, Graham Potter may want a little bit more time on the training pitches for him. That's why we have Gallagher, and that, of course, opens the door for Azpilicueta to start there on the right.
We got a question from GV about Lewis Hall. Could he come off the bench and make a good impact player?
We've seen, I think, Lewis Hall start at St James's Park just prior to that World Cup break and done a decent job. But of course, there was heavy rotation within that. The Blues squad, I think, was 9 changes maybe for the game for the game week 17 on Tuesday evening. So, look, he's definitely on the fringes of that team, but Chelsea are welcoming a lot of players back. Ziyech is also back in contention as well. So it's going to be difficult. So there's a lot of competition in there. Maybe, a start potentially in the FA Cup, see how it goes. And, like I say, with a lot of injuries and illnesses floating around, there may be opportunities coming up for the young midfielder.
We've got a question from, just a pointing out by Cedric. I think he's questioning your pronunciation, Ben, of Chalobah.
No, anybody that listens to these live streams regularly could never hold me to account for my pronunciation of players' names. It's impeccable, by the way. I get these direct from the clubs. The only issue that I may have, it could be a problem that you may have with the volume or the speakers or however you choose to listen to this live stream. It's obviously having some kind of interference because how I pronounce it is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, Cedric, it's probably the internet your end because we've never got a player pronunciation wrong.
Never.
Somebody's pointed out that my camera is blurry. I think my camera's had probably one or two drinks preemptively before New Year's, so it's probably a little bit drunk. Wesley has asked, no Pulisic in the team.
Yeah, tough call. How many of these players do you shoehorn in? That's the issue we have. Does he look to drop Mason Mount? No. Does Kai Havertz get dropped? No. Maybe Raheem Sterling, possibly. Like I say, the question mark or the gamble is maybe Gallagher. If you want to change things up a little bit, we haven't even got Zakaria in there as well, who could drop in. So, yeah, it's the US international, unfortunately, is a player I chose to miss out. Graham Potter team, when he was at Brighton and since his arrival at Chelsea, he's Pep-esque in his starting lineups. There's always lots of change. There's always lots of guesswork involved in there. And inherently, more often than not, I get them wrong.
So we shall move on from Chelsea onto Crystal Palace. They really had a tough time, didn't they, in that opening match? 2 red cards. And how is that going to affect their lineup?
Yeah, Patrick Vieira said that was probably the worst performance of his tenure at the club. So hugely disappointing. And he'll be hoping that the Eagles can bounce back from that 3-0 home defeat. As you alluded to, the 2 send-ins off. The one that really hurts the Eagles is at left back. That's the absence of Tyreek Mitchell. Now, who do we, the obvious choice? Well, there isn't one really in terms of a really experienced left back who could just drop in there. We have seen Joel Ward who can pop in, but we've seen this before when we expected Joel Ward to maybe switch across to that left-hand side. He didn't. He dropped Jeffrey Sloop in there, and I've went with Sloop again, and I've put Ward in on the right as Nathaniel Klein moving out of the team, and that again is just to shake things up after a really poor performance. James Compkins is the other player that's going to miss out. But we have Mark Guy returning after picking up his 5th caution of the campaign back in game week 16, who slots back in there. The other sort of talking point that we can reference is the return of Edouard in attack. We have seen Wilfried Zaha lead that Crystal Palace front line for the last few games, but fully fit and fighting again. And, like I say, after that disappointing result, I just think Patrick Vieira will want to change things up a little bit.
Marius has asked about Chris Richard. He had a 30-minute run out against Fulham. So is he not going to feature?
Quite possibly. I think he will get minutes either in game week 18 or game week 19. But there's so many influencing factors in terms of looking at the squads in and around that. It's competitive minutes and that sharpness that concerns me with regards to him. Of course, he had quite a significant period on the sidelines with that hamstring problem. So it's whether Patrick Vieira actually believes, that he's ready, to start for Palace, or is he going to be better, to be gradually increased minutes from the bench. Like I say, if it's from 18, another decent run out, then it could be forcing his way into contention for game week 19.
We do have a question here about Edouard as well. And I think one of the interesting things that I watched during the Crystal Palace match and looking at the numbers after, they were really poor at creating chances. They had 0.07 XG over the course of the 90. I mean, it's basically like they didn't have a shot at all on goal. They might as well have not turned up in attack. Is there going to be a tweak in the team to be able to facilitate more creativity? Is Edouard going to get the chop? How are they going to get a bit of a better performance out of that team?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the 2 sending off first and foremost. So, 9-man, you're always going to be up against it. And, Fulham were flying and form at the minute. So they, with a
we may have lost Ben temporarily. It seems like there's a bit of a loss of connection. I shall message him and see what's happening with him at the moment. We've totally lost him. Oh, is he back? You are back, Ben.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm not exactly sure what happened there.
We lost you for a second. You were mid-flow talking about Crystal Palace, the sending
off. Yeah, apologies. It just went off and then it just all of a sudden came back on. So, you can hide behind the fact that Palace only had 9 men. Fulham with the wind beneath their wings and, the form of Mitrovic carried them forward. But, if you look within that Palace team, they've got some great players, some great young, exciting players. Eze, Elise, you've got Zaha. So I don't think it needs a massive change in personnel, maybe just a change in attitude. And Patrick Vieira won a response. Like I say, he's already said that, I highlighted before, that was the worst performance under his tenure. So he'd want a reaction. And if he doesn't get a reaction, then I'm sure he'll let his players know.
Right, we're going to move to Everton now, and it was a disappointing result against Wolves, 2-1 loss. There's a lot of problems there. So let's just have a look at their injury news. Is there any reasons to kind of explain this? I think one of the big losses, again, is Yerry Mina, another injury to him.
Yeah, where do we start with Yerry Mina? His influence and in that Everton team cannot be understated. The points per game ratio for when he starts and when he's absent is huge. However, you just kind of keep him fit. Thankfully, this latest issue, I'm not going to say it's a setback as such, this issue, hamstring related, isn't thought to be too serious. There's a little bit of a sensation, as Frank Lampard referenced, more fatigue related. However, Connor Cody is back, missed the game against his parent club. So I do see those central defensive partner, being preferred as Tarkowski and Cody. A fully fit Yerry Mina, how does that fit into that team? I don't know. It's an interesting one. Maybe we see, Everton go with 3 at the back and maybe push Mikalenko and Patterson a little bit further and go with a 3-5-2. But for the moment, like I say, just because it's that hamstring and just because of those historical issues that we've had with Yerry Mina, you need to be treating him very, very, very carefully. And that's why I don't have him in the starting 11. The other main talking point will be the return of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. There were question marks. He's off the back of his 150th setback, of the last year. Knee, shoulder, every possible issue that he could possibly have. So, again, you want to talk about protecting the player, not just for the here and now, but also the remainder and throughout the second half of the season. Frank Lampard will be desperate, absolutely desperate under mountain pressure to get Dominic involved. I don't think he's ready for a start, so that's why we went with Neil Maupay.
We got a question from Marius, quite a sad one. He says, will DCL ever become fit again, is the question.
Look, we hope so. He's had a pretty torrid what is it now? Maybe 14, 15, 16 months. Prior to that, under Ancelotti, we had basically a player who was pretty much ever present. Went away to the Euros with England, didn't get a lot of involvement, picked up a toe injury, and then since that problem, everything seems to have snowballed. And what happens when you return in season is you're not being able to get that level of intensive work away from the games. You're being thrown in at the deep end, as it were. The pressures, the burden on managers to have your best players, because that's what Everton do lack. They lack a goal scorer. So whenever Dominic Calvert-Lewin is anywhere near full fitness, he's going to be thrown back in there, and it almost becomes this vicious circle. And again, he's missed another chunk of mid-season training. And I think ultimately he might be back in that team, in that squad. But in terms of a real consistent level of return to performance, we might have to wait until next season. And again, that will be dependent upon Dominic Calvert-Lewin having a full, solid, pre-season program under his belt.
Yeah, it's quite sad, really. And we did discuss some of this with Colin Lewin as well, how Euro 2020 maybe preemptively bringing him back, or even the fact that he had that deconditioning due to not playing at all in the Euros cost him in the long term. One team that is doing very well, though, Fulham, and I think this is going to be an exciting game week for them as well. Game week 18 is kind of a recipe for success. Playing Southampton. Southampton are not good in the air. They've got Mitrovic, who is good in the air, but also Mitrovic is just so good at scoring, and they're playing against arguably the worst goalkeeper in the Premier League. I mean, this is something that you wrote about in the 888bet article, Ben, wasn't it? That he has the worst XG prevented.
I would say statistically the worst goalkeeper in the Premier League. And for those in layman's terms, basically Southampton or Bazunu has conceded 10 more goals than he really should have. So that isn't great. That will have that, Mitrovic licking his lips ahead of this game. And we also talk about Southampton being able to defend that aerial threat. There has been question marks from the dead ball and those set pieces. And, we all know how strong Mitrovic is in the end. A little bit of trolling, I think, from Marco Silva this afternoon in terms of a little update on Mitrovic. Is he ready? Yes. Is he 100%? No, but he's getting there. We know that ongoing foot injury picked up in that international break prior to the World Cup had been hampering him. Wasn't fully match fit at the World Cup. Returned, didn't seem to be bothering him too much on Boxing Day. Like I say, Fulham come back, hit the ground running, and I can see the Lily White's been unchanged.
We had a very, very harsh question here from Magic69. Some of the OG viewers from the channel will know about this. Who will play first, Dominic Calvert-Lewin or Nathan Ferguson?
Absolutely, categorically. And I tell you what, I will hang up everything if it isn't Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Just to kind of fill people in, Nathan Ferguson, unfortunately, we shouldn't laugh, it's quite sad. He's had quite a turgid time with injury since he joined Crystal Palace, and it's kind of like, how many games has he missed now? 40 plus, or just from, was it January last year?
I think the better question, is the way to look at it is, and I am off the top of my head here, but 8 competitive minutes since his arrival at the club.
Yeah,
that's all he's played.
That's really, really, it's awful, really. Shouldn't be a laughing point, really. Samir Ramini has asked, thoughts on Cordova Reed instead of Pereira as a differential? It's an interesting question. What I like with Pereira is he's on the set pieces. And the other thing as well is Pereira, I think, is a differential at times because people don't often play him. He's the bench warmer. So I think maybe the differential in of itself is playing Pereira if you think he's going to do well. But looking at the data as well, Pereira is the third best chance creator of set pieces this season. Fulham are pretty good at set pieces. They have fantastic player Mitrovic to put the chances away. So I think that in of itself might be a differential as well. But we're going to move to Leeds United. Any kind of updates on the team there?
Yeah, this was one we've just heard from, again, embargoed quotes released by Leeds following their game midweek against Manchester City. They arrive on Tyneside to play my boys Newcastle. Not too much in terms of personnel issues that we're aware of. The talk has been around, well, we know that Tyler Adams is back after serving a one-match ban. Also had a little bit of a calf issue post-World Cup. But, is the availability of Patrick Vieira, is he going to be forcing his way back? Unfortunately, not. It's probably going to be at least a week or so before he's back in contention for that start. They're hoping he's maybe back on the training pitches towards Sunday or Monday. If you missed it, again, a player who has been severely hampered in recent times with injury. The latest setback was a minor surgical procedure on his groin. Again, they thought that was going to be around about maybe a 14-day recovery for that, where his rehab was heavily disrupted because of illness. That's had a knock-on effect, and that's why we're now going into 2023.
And I think we've got a question as well. Jandre has said, no Greenwood. Is he going to start? What was with his random start?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of squad management from Jess March against Manchester City. I spoke about it before. Managers may not openly admit that, you're maybe looking ahead of certain games and almost you can write games off against the champions. He looked within his squad. I think Jack Harrison was one of those players who didn't play against Manchester City because he's had a little bit of an adductor issue in there. And it's probably a case of, well, do I start him against Manchester City or Newcastle? Realistically, he's probably thinking, well, we've got more of a chance of getting a result against Newcastle. So, we'll try to maybe go all out for 3 points there, and we'll see what we can do against Manchester City. It's a free hit, to coin the old adage. But so that's why, Greenwood was thrown in there. But like I say, there's a couple of players who are in and around and back in that Leeds United starting lineup. So it'll be a tough game for Newcastle, but I fully expect us to take all 3 points.
Marius has asked, when will Sinistera be back?
Well, it's probably gone a little bit longer than initially anticipated, because he was targeting the festive schedule for return. Hopefully back on the training pitches, maybe back end of next week, hopefully. And then it's just a case of him being able to prove his fitness and see how quickly he can get up to speed. So I don't know. Maybe, I think the FA Cup's probably comes too soon, but maybe mid to late January is realistic for maybe he's pushing for a start, potentially, as long as there's no kind of reaction along the way.
So we moved to Leicester, and they were pretty bad against your boys, Newcastle, but not wanting to take away from Newcastle as well. You guys were excellent. But one of the interesting things for me is the real kind of felt absence of James Maddison. Leicester did not create one chance at all through the middle in that game against Newcastle. They're really struggling. And, Maddison's absence is going to be for a while, though, isn't it?
In terms of any kind of definitive return to play timeline, we just don't have it. And that's because, the pain as it's presented in the knee, it's slightly different than it was prior to the World Cup. It was almost at the posterior aspect of the leg. So, really at the distal end of that, almost that hamstring insertion point right in behind there. But now, since he's come back, the pain's presented in the front of that knee, the anterior. And he actually went down to London earlier this week for a second opinion, just to see what's happening with regards to that. So until they can identify that underlying cause, address that issue, get him back on the training pitches, then he simply isn't going to be in contention.
So we move from Leicester onto their opponents this week, which is Liverpool. We've got a few questions about the players in terms of tactics, but before we get on to that little bit of analysis, Ben, any big injury news for Liverpool?
Yeah, I think by the looks of it, I think I'm pretty much going unchanged for Liverpool. The only addition that we could potentially see to the Liverpool squad would be Konate. He rejoined the group, I think it was on the 27th, so he has been training following his exertions out in Qatar. But like I say, I think it's Matip in Van Dijk. Also, Gakpo had been a few questions with regards to that. There's only a minute chance that he could make the game on the 2nd of January against Brentford. And that's basically because, they need his registration documentation to be processed. But unfortunately, it's going to be public holidays. That's going to disrupt it. So, look, Jurgen Klopp said there's no rush. He's our player. It is what it is, and we'll see when we see him.
And I think a lot of people are asking as well about Darwin Núñez against Leicester. I think, you wrote about this in the 888 article, Bet. The people can check that out. But from the top of my head, Leicester have the worst aerial duel win rate in the Premier League. They're terrible at defending set pieces. And so Núñez, yes, he obviously spurned a few chances against Aston Villa, but, looking at the law of averages, he should have scored 1 or 2 in that game in terms of XG. He had the highest XG, most shots in the box. I think against a team like Leicester, who have a really bad goalkeeper, who, Ward is fighting with the Southampton goalkeeper as the worst this season, statistically, as we said. It's a good opportunity for those who've rolled the dice. So I'd keep faith in Núñez if you have him for this game. But generally, I'm kind of erring away from Liverpool assets just because there's a bit of a lack of consistency, apart from Salah, who is just Salah. He just does Salah things. Let's turn to Manchester City, though, and any kind of injury news there. I mean, a lot of people were worried, why was Cancelo out of the team?
I had an absolute nightmare predicting this lineup midweek. I think I maybe only got 6 or 7 right. There was a few curveballs in there, Cancelo being one. And the only assumption could be that it's that's post World Cup exertions and Pep not being 100% totally satisfied with where they were in terms of their fitness and in terms of their integration with the squad. So there were no sort of niggles and knocks that were certainly made available publicly that we were aware of. So, we always talk about this Pep team and Pep roulette and how he will go to line up. There's chances are that I may even tinker with this team slightly before the deadline. It doesn't include Jack Grealish, got his first 2 assists of the season midweek. Mahrez, I don't have in. I am starting with Cancelo and Walker, and I have Laporte in there as well. But like I say, there's Ake, there's a Kanji, there's a lot of players. There's a lot that you can do within that City squad. So it's very difficult to predict. So pray for Ben.
No, I think people, if they're fair, should understand with the injury news. But was there a reason then for Cancelo being dropped? Was it just purely tactical? What did Pep say on that?
Yeah, there hasn't really been any sort of major comments from the City boss in terms of the squad that he put out in that starting 11. Certainly his press conference on Friday just focused on, well, he had 2 updates really. Although he said, Calvin Phillips was a strange one. I would say, did he hang Calvin Phillips out to dry a little bit? It's not often you hear managers and Pep sort of single players out. And, when asked a question following his omission from the squad, I think it was in the Carabao Cup, he said that Calvin Phillips had come back overweight and he wasn't in a position to even train with the squad. And that, relates and touches upon, the conversation we had with Colin. Players come back deconditioned. He is, and we've seen him return to the matchday squad in game week 17. So he did mention him. He spoke also Julian Alvarez, who will return after New Year's Eve, so early in 2023. So he's out of contention. But for the rest, like I say, it's purely just down to his own personal feeling, his tactics and his philosophy and seeing how he wants to set up for, that game against Leeds and going forward.
A couple of people have said as well, do you dare put Foden in, Ben? No Grealish?
Yeah, yeah, what can I say? He gets 2 assists and then I drop him, but he's the one, and I absolutely hate Manchester City. I do, in terms of trying to predict this lineup, because inevitably I always get at least 1 or 2 wrong. And the players that I admit always seems to stir a lot of chatter and a lot of controversy. And I get the arguments, because you can make arguments for 15 or 16 of those players starting every single week, because they're world-class players and they would probably walk into maybe 99% of every other Premier League team.
Yeah, it is really tough. So we're gonna relieve you of the pressure now, Ben. We're gonna move to the red side of Manchester. We've had a few questions on Anthony Martial. Is he going to start 2 games in a row? I mean, is that physically possible for him? What is the injury news there?
Yeah, again, so this is Eric Ten Hag, embargoed quotes. So there's question marks of players that missed out midweek. You're thinking those that missed out with illness, McTominay being one of those. None of those really affect that starting 11, or shouldn't, if everybody is who we expect to be fit and available. Main talking points will be with regards to that central pairing. We've seen Luke Shaw alongside Raphael Varane against Nottingham Forest. That was because Harry Maguire was recovering from, again, his own virus, so wasn't quite at it. But I do have Maguire back in there. I've put Luke Shaw back out to that left-hand side now. Do we go with Wan-Bissaka on the right? there's a little bit of flexibility within that. Martinez is also back on the training pitches, but I just think post World Cup and whatever celebrations he's been doing, in and around touring Buenos Aires, as Eric Ten Hag said, I think it's physically, we don't know what kind of shape he's in. So, like I say, even a couple of days on the training pitches, maybe he's just a little bit short in terms of that little bit of sharpness. So that's why I've put Maguire in there. But like I say, there are a few question marks over potentially who could be starting in this 11 this weekend.
And a couple of people are asking about Lindelof. Why was Shaw as a centre back? Is that going to be rectified this weekend?
Yeah, Lindelof was illness as well. So, slightly different to injuries, and where we have a little bit of an understanding of, the pathology and how those sort of players will go through those various stages of recovery. With illness, it comes down to the individual and how they respond to that virus and particular strain. So, while there are absolutely no guarantees, fairly hopeful that Lindelof could return to the matchday squad, but like I say, his training patterns would have been severely hampered, and that's why I don't have him pushing for a start.
So I think one of the most questioned players, most questions about them, is Callum Wilson, your boy from Newcastle. I was stirring up vicious rumour that you were the one that made him ill, because you both become ill at the same time. No, but in all seriousness, what was impressive about Newcastle was how well you guys played without him. Eddie Howe just seems to have an answer to every question that you can possibly put to that team, and he seems to come up trumps pretty much all the time. But Chris Wood, you still have him starting. So is it still a little while till we can see Callum Wilson back in the Newcastle 11?
In terms of a start, yeah, look, I think that comes down. Look, undoubtedly, Callum Wilson is the Newcastle's number one top striker. He's the main man of the club. So let's put all that to bed. And yes, I do own Callum Wilson first and foremost. And yes, it does pain me to put Chris Wood, in that starting lineup. But I need to look at this, realistically and understand where he's at. His training has been severely hampered. He did rejoin the group on Thursday. He came through that session. He's got another session today, Friday. As long as there's no reaction, he will be in the matchday squad. So you can tick that box. Great. However, as well, Chris Wood deserves that place in that starting 11. I mean, he started against Chelsea way back in game week 16. And then he continued that form with Rio Vallecano, played really well, and then done an excellent job against Leicester. And, that was highlighted by the fact that Eddie Howe said he's probably in the best form of his Newcastle career under his management. So, for me, to even consider taking a player who you've just said is in the form of his life for somebody who isn't 100% just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And, I think that's an opportunity for really sort of Chris Wood to serve a timely reminder of, and continue to do what he's doing and prove that he's an able deputy, an able backup, but also, like I say, just an opportunity to get his minutes while he's playing well, because, it's all about this squad management. Unfortunately, we know historically that Callum Wilson has picked up a couple of injuries in the past. So, you're going to want those players who inherently would be on the fringes of that starting 11 to remain motivated, to remain sharp. And, I think it's great management from Eddie Howe. And that's why I expect Chris Wood to start against Leeds.
Samir has asked the question about Almiron as a punt for captain this week, or stick with Haaland to avoid the FOMO. Again, just referencing your 888 article bet article. I don't know why I keep saying that the wrong way around. You put Almiron as a good differential captain, didn't you?
Look, I think, right, in terms of that differential, or that captaincy piece, as it were, there would be no peace in the real FPL world if you wanted to play it the way you should, strictly speaking. Because Erling Haaland is really your perma captain, your set and forget. But in the interest of looking elsewhere, if you're looking for that differential, then look, Miguel Almiron is making a case for the point that he's probably one of the most improved players ever, along with Joe Linton at Newcastle under Eddie Howe. His output, are we at 9.66 FPL points per 90 over the last, is it 10 games?
6 games.
Or so? 6 games.
Yeah.
No team has scored more, I think, is it since game week 10 than Newcastle. They have the highest XG. They're coming up against a Leeds team who historically you would question their ability to be able to, their defensive solidity. Look, he's a guy that plays on the cusp. He was a guy that's getting a lot of love from the Newcastle supporter. He's playing with a lot of confidence. St James's Park will be absolutely jumping. Hey, I'm all for that. That Almiron armband. If you want to stick it on him, of course, why not?
So we have got a question about the preferred defence of Newcastle: Burn, Botman, Shah, Trippier. Is that mostly nailed? We've got a question there from John Dre.
Look, the only changes that I could foresee being brought about would be due to illness or injury. Look, I'm a big fan of Matty Targett. I think he's a great player, but you kind of disrupt that backline, given that the performances they've had. And again, another clean sheet. I think they've had 8 clean sheets this season. Is it 11 goals conceded? So, yeah, you don't want to be messing on with that. That creates that foundation, that solid structure for Newcastle to go out and attack, and allows the likes of the Almirons and the Chris Woods and the Guimaraes and to be able to go out and get those goals. So I don't see that back four really changing. 18 to 19 might be a little bit different, but that might be fatigue management, or like I say, if there's illness or one or two sort of knocks and niggles.
We have got quite a few questions here, but we're going to have to skip through because we've actually run over, Ben. We're eating into your time. Nottingham Forest, quick update on them because I don't think too many people are invested in them.
The two main talking points. Jess Lingard was forced off Old Trafford with a hamstring-related problem, not believed to be too serious, but suffice to say, Steve Cooper may look to manage that. Morgan Gibbs-White, calf problem, ongoing, probably too soon for him. Doesn't want to definitively rule him out, but we're still probably, it could be another 7 to 10 days before we see him really back in contention.
Then on to the Saints, Southampton. They've not played all that well. Any big injury news for them?
Romeo Lavia is working his way back to full fitness following that hamstring issue. Nathan Jones hasn't really got a full complement of players to choose from. The other sort of main talking point would be the goalkeeping situation, and the reason why Alex McCarthy has been out of contention recently, that's because of a training ground ankle injury. He shouldn't be too far away.
Now Spurs, they didn't look all that impressive against Brentford. Was that for injury reasons? Were they missing key personnel?
There was one or two. We were expecting Rodrigo Bentancur to be back in contention on New Year's Day. He picked up that adductor problem playing for Uruguay at the World Cup. Now, he has had a slight setback. There's been a reaction in there. So Antonio Conte has said that the player will probably be sent for another MRI scan to help determine the extent of that setback. So that means that we have Basuma retaining his place in that midfield. I also have Christian Romero straight back in there in that back three. He's returned from his involvement out in Qatar, trained really well, trained really hard, so no concerns with regards to that. The other main discussion point will be sort of Langley or maybe Ben Davies. Antonio Conte has been bigging up the on-loan defender. That's why he gets a nod. And of course, Hugo Lloris back between the sticks with Fraser Forster making way. Lloris was on the bench in game week 17 following his late return.
We got a question. Is Doherty now the first choice starting defender at right back?
It comes down to performances, as always. The issues with regards to his indifferent first half of the season were mainly fitness related. That was, that carryover of that injury that he had and not being able to get in the full flow of things. But he's had a great mid-season break, scored lots of goals. So I think, in terms of where he's at, he's put himself in a really good place. But, we spoke about it many times before. Antonio Conte does have options in those flanks, and he could quite easily rotate around congested periods or maybe his upcoming cup games with Emerson Royal also fit.
Now we move on to West Ham. They've had quite a few injury issues, a few problems, and also they just can't score goals at the moment. But is there going to be an injury boost to that starting 11?
Well, Mikel Antonio will be hoping that, he can really sort of try and put a decent run together to stake a claim for that starting berth, slip down the pecking order, slightly down, behind Gianluca Scamacca. He's working his way back from an ankle injury, picked it up against Fulham in a pre-season friendly. He still isn't 100%, but he could make the squad. The other main talking point is around Naif Agard. That was an adductor and also illness that kept him out of Morocco's last game. Now, he's returned to West Ham, but David Moyes said he's a few kilos below where he should be, lost a lot of weight. So they're building him back up just in terms of, throwing him back in there. West Ham have plenty of options, so there's no need to take any chances or any unnecessary risks with that. That's why you don't have Agard back in that team. But like I say, he shouldn't be too far away.
Jandre has said, any chance Bowen as a striker with Fornals coming in?
David Moyes has spoken about that. He's talked about, historically the moves that he's had, maybe moving Marko Arnautovic from those wide areas to central. I only see Bowen sort of moving centrally if Scamacca or Mikel Antonio are absent for whatever reason. And Mikel Antonio, although he hasn't had a great season, I still think he deserves his opportunity to try and play himself back in and hopefully get a couple of goals, because he is a confidence player. He will be massively disappointing. And, he want to go out there and prove David Moyes that he's still able to, to contribute to the team and feels that he's deserving of that place in that start 11 before, Scamacca gets fully up to speed and, he wants to give David Moyes a real question over who should have that starting berth. But I don't see Bowen really starting centrally when either of those two players are fit.
And then the final team is Wolves. Any injury updates from them that's going to affect them in game week 18?
Will it affect him? Johnny is available in theory following that hamstring problem, but he has had a significant spell on the sideline, so he'd be lacking match fitness. Boubacar Traore is in a slightly better position, but again, that adductor problem has kept him out for a few weeks. So, following that late 2-1 win at Goodison Park, the one that I sort of want to highlight is I do have Aït-Nouri in at left back, which may disappoint a lot of owners of Hugo Bueno. I think he's still at around 3.9 million. Aït-Nouri scored twice now after being introduced from the bench. So I just think he deserves his chance in that start 11. So that's why I have him in there. Daniel Podence has shaken off a minor knock and he's cleared to feature for Wolves.
So I think that's it, Ben. You have to rush off, don't you? And also you have to focus on recovering. You need that return to play, return to fitness, so that you're fully fit for the January and beyond as well. But yeah, just to thank everybody for tuning in. Lots of lovely questions. Thanks for just getting us through it. We loved interacting with you, and we will be back again for another live broadcast. When will the next live stream be, Ben?
Well, of course, we've got game week 19, which kicks off on Monday night. Is that right? So we have Liverpool and Brentford on Monday night. So, we could go live on probably Monday. Keep your eyes and ears peeled. We'll push that out. We'll see. We're not going to have a great deal of news post-match from managers, although, all of the usuals will be updated. So it may be more important, that we have an opportunity to do that live Q&A, because like I say, the information just won't be readily available direct from the clubs. Like I say, given the fact that it's such a quick turnaround and a deadline, we're just not going to be able to hear from everyone before that's locked in.
So just to reiterate, 2:15 p.m. Monday, like usual, the 2:15 time, but it will be, I guess, it's Monday, New Year's Day, isn't it?
No,
No.
it's the 2nd of January, Jason.
My calendar is all screwed up. Just check us out Monday. That's the correct information there, 2:15, and we will see you again. But for now, wishing everybody the best of luck with their FPL teams. Hope you have a lovely, fantastic weekend and celebrate New Year's, because that's obviously on Sunday, not Monday, and have a lovely time. But we will see you again very, very soon, because it's so tight